"Excuse me, miss. I need to verify your ticket again." Karen Mitchell's voice cuts through the first-class cabin with practiced authority. Lila Chen-Williams looks up from her medical textbook, confusion replacing concentration as the flight attendant extends her hand with suspicious confidence. Around them, executives in tailored suits pause their pre-flight routines. The pharmaceutical CEO in 1A lowers his newspaper. The tech investor stops typing. All eyes focus on the young woman, whose boarding pass suddenly requires additional scrutiny. "Our system is showing some irregularities," Karen announces loud enough for everyone to hear, examining Lila's perfectly valid documents with theatrical suspicion. Sometimes people find creative ways to access seats they can't actually afford. Lila's cheeks burn as 20 pairs of eyes assess her simple sweater, worn messenger bag, and apparent audacity to occupy premium space. Her phone buzzes insistently. Executive assistant, flashing on the screen. But she ignores it. She has no idea that in exactly 15 minutes, her father will board this aircraft, and everything will change forever. Lila had saved for 18 months to afford this first-class ticket home to San Francisco. Every shift at the campus cafe, every tutoring session with struggling pre-med students, every dollar carefully counted and saved. She deserved this small luxury after finals week, after the grueling schedule that had left her exhausted and homesick. Her simple black sweater and jeans might not scream wealth, but they're clean and well-fitted, chosen with the same careful consideration she applies to everything in her life. Karen Mitchell has seen it all in her 15 years with Pacific Airways. She prides herself on maintaining standards, on ensuring that first class remains the exclusive domain it was meant to be. Something about this young woman bothers her. Maybe it's the vintage messenger bag instead of designer luggage, or the way she seems too comfortable in a space Karen believes she doesn't belong. The other passengers in first class fit Karen's expectations perfectly. There's Robert Sterling, a pharmaceutical executive returning from a medical conference, his Armani suit and gold Rolex speaking the language of legitimate wealth. Sarah Whitman, a tech investor, taps away on her MacBook Pro, her Hermes bag casually draped over the armrest. These are Karen's people, the ones who belong in these 36-inch pitch seats with full lie-flat capability. Lila's phone buzzes insistently. The caller ID reads, Executive Assistant, Chen Industries. But she declines the call without hesitation. She spent 4 years trying to prove she can succeed without her father's name, without the advantages that come with being Richard Chen-Williams' daughter. Today is no different. She silences her phone and returns to her textbook, unaware that her father's assistant has been trying to reach her about his delayed arrival. Karen approaches other passengers with warm efficiency, her demeanor shifting noticeably as she checks tickets and offers pre-flight beverages. Mr. Sterling, so wonderful to have you flying with us again. Your usual scotch? Her voice lilts with practiced charm. Ms. Whitman, I've upgraded your meal to the chef's special as requested. Each interaction reinforces the hierarchy Karen believes defines this space. But when her gaze returns to Lila, her expression hardens. The young woman's presence feels like an anomaly, a glitch in the system that Karen has spent 15 years perfecting. She notices how Lila doesn't display the casual arrogance of wealth, doesn't name drop or demand special treatment. Instead, Lila studies quietly, her highlighter moving methodically across dense medical text. This restraint, ironically, makes Karen more suspicious rather than less. The boarding announcement echoes through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, We're expecting one additional VIP passenger before departure. We appreciate your patience during this brief delay. Karen barely registers the announcement, too focused on the problem she perceives in seat 2A. She doesn't notice the unusual activity outside the aircraft windows, the black SUVs pulling up to the private terminal entrance, or the way the captain's voice carried a note of deference unusual for standard boarding announcements. Lila shifts in her seat, checking her watch. She has a family dinner planned for tonight. The first time in months she'll be home for more than a quick weekend visit. Her phone buzzes again, this time showing Dad's office. But she lets it go to voicemail. Whatever corporate crisis requires her father's immediate attention can wait. She's learned that in the Chen-Williams household, there's always another emergency, another deal, another reason why family time gets postponed. Karen's approach to seat 2A is deliberate, her smile now purely professional. Miss, I'm going to need to verify your ticket once more. Our system is showing some irregularities with your booking. She extends her hand with practiced authority, though her internal system shows no such irregularities. Lila looks up from her textbook, confusion flickering across her features. I'm sorry, is there a problem? I checked in online this morning without any issues. Lila's voice remains steady, though her heart rate quickens. She retrieves her boarding pass and ID from her bag, the same documents that passed through security without question. Karen examines them with theatrical scrutiny, turning the boarding pass over as if searching for hidden flaws. Karen murmurs, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Sometimes our system doesn't catch certain discrepancies until boarding. I'll need to see your credit card, the one used to purchase this ticket. The request isn't standard protocol, but Karen delivers it with enough authority that Lila complies, though her hands tremble slightly as she reaches for her wallet. Robert Sterling lowers his newspaper, his attention drawn to the interaction. Sarah Whitman glances up from her laptop, her expression a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Other passengers begin to take notice, creating an audience for Lila's humiliation. The weight of their collective gaze makes the spacious first-class cabin feel suffocating. Karen examines the credit card with exaggerated care. This is a student account. The limit on these cards typically wouldn't cover a first-class ticket. Her voice carries a note of triumph, as if she's uncovered evidence of fraud. Sometimes people find creative ways to access seats they can't actually afford. The implication hangs heavy in the air, and Lila feels heat rise in her cheeks. I saved for this ticket. Lila explains quietly, maintaining her dignity despite the growing humiliation. I work 2 jobs while attending medical school. Every penny was earned honestly. Her voice wavers slightly, but she holds Karen's gaze steadily. Around them, passengers exchange glances and whispered comments that Lila pretends not to hear. Medical school. Karen repeats with barely concealed skepticism. Which one? The question feels like a trap, and Lila hesitates before answering. When she mentions Harvard, Karen's expression suggests she believes it's a lie. Harvard Medical School, of course. The sarcasm in her voice is unmistakable. The situation escalates when Karen steps into the aisle, her voice rising just enough to ensure maximum audience participation. Sir, she calls to a passing security officer. We may have a situation here. This passenger's documentation isn't adding up, and I'm concerned about fraudulent ticket use. The officer approaches, his presence making Lila feel criminalized for the simple act of occupying her purchased seat. Lila's phone buzzes insistently in her bag, the caller ID still showing her father's office, but she doesn't dare answer it now. The attention it might draw feels more dangerous than helpful. My father wouldn't want me to use his name to solve this, she murmurs, more to herself than anyone else, though Karen catches the comment. Your father? Karen's eyebrows arch with disbelief. Let me guess, he's someone important. The mockery in her voice draws chuckles from a few passengers who've decided Lila is providing entertainment rather than suffering injustice. Look, sweetheart, I've heard every story in the book. Rich daddy, famous connections, secret wealth. None of it changes the facts. The security officer requests Lila's documents, his professional demeanor more neutral than Karen's obvious hostility. As he examines her ID and boarding pass, Lila notices other passengers pulling out phones, some recording the interaction. The violation of having her humiliation documented feels almost worse than the humiliation itself. Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings, the officer finally says. The flight attendant has expressed concerns about your ticket validity, and we need to resolve this on the ground. Lila's heart sinks as she realizes she's about to be escorted off the plane in front of everyone. As she slowly closes her textbook and begins gathering her few belongings, the cabin announcement crackles to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a brief delay due to the late arrival of a priority passenger. We appreciate your continued patience and expect to be underway shortly. The timing feels cruel, as if the universe is extending her humiliation just a little longer. Lila stands, her dignity intact despite the circumstances, and follows the security officer towards the front of the cabin. Behind her, she hears Karen explaining to nearby passengers, "We have to maintain standards. You understand how these situations can get complicated when people try to exceed their means." The words follow Lila like poison, each syllable designed to justify the unjustifiable. The walk from first class through the business section feels endless. Lila maintains her composure, her head held high despite the curious stares and whispered comments from passengers in every row. Some faces show sympathy, others judgment, but most display the uncomfortable fascination people have with others' misfortune. The security officer walking beside her seems genuinely apologetic. His quiet, "I'm sorry about this, miss," offering the first kindness she's received in the past 20 minutes. Back in first class, Karen basks in the validation of her actions. She approaches Robert Sterling with renewed confidence. "I apologize for the disruption, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes we have to deal with these situations, but I always prioritize the comfort of our legitimate passengers." Sterling nods absently, though something in his expression suggests discomfort with what he's witnessed. Sarah Whitman has returned to her laptop, but her typing seems more aggressive than before. The captain's voice fills the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're still waiting for our final passenger. This individual requires special protocol clearance, so we appreciate your continued patience." Karen barely registers the announcement, too busy enjoying the aftermath of her successful intervention. She doesn't notice the unusual activity visible through the cabin windows, the ground crew positioning a red carpet at the jet bridge, or the way airport security has quietly cordoned off the boarding area. Lila finds herself seated in economy row 37, middle seat, between a businessman who immediately claims both armrests and a mother wrestling with a crying infant. The contrast to her first-class accommodation couldn't be starker. The seat fabric is worn, the tray table sticky, and the personal space virtually non-existent. She reopens her textbook, trying to maintain some semblance of the study routine she'd planned for the flight. Her phone buzzes again. Chairman's office. And this time, the businessman beside her notices. "Popular lady," he comments sarcastically, clearly having heard about the first-class incident. Lila silences the phone without answering, though her father's persistence in trying to reach her suggests something unusual is happening. She wonders if he's heard about her situation somehow, though she can't imagine how. In first class, the atmosphere has shifted subtly. Several passengers seem uncomfortable with what they've witnessed, though none spoke up during the incident. A young executive named David Park finds himself questioning his own silence. An older woman keeps glancing towards the economy section with what might be regret. The initial entertainment value of Lila's removal has given way to a lingering unease that Karen seems oblivious to. The captain receives an urgent communication from ground control. His conversation with the flight attendant supervisor is hushed but animated, involving phrases like priority protocol and executive clearance. The supervisor approaches Karen with new instructions that seem to make her defensive. "What do you mean, verify the passenger list? I handled a fraudulent ticket situation according to standard procedure." Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, an unusual level of corporate activity unfolds. 3 black SUVs have arrived at the private terminal entrance, their occupants remaining inside while airport officials scurry between vehicles and the boarding gate. The red carpet extends further than normal, and additional security personnel have positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the terminal. Lila attempts to focus on her pathophysiology notes, but the crying infant and cramped conditions make concentration nearly impossible. The irony isn't lost on her. She's studying to become a doctor, to help people, while being treated as if she's somehow less deserving of basic dignity. Her phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Chen-Williams, this is urgent. Please answer your phone. Janet Morrison, Executive Assistant." The use of her full hyphenated name startles her. Very few people outside her family know she uses both surnames, preferring to go by Lila Chen in most academic and social settings. The message suggests whoever is trying to reach her knows exactly who she is, which makes their persistence more ominous than annoying. Back in first class, Karen notices that several passengers seem distracted, checking their phones more frequently and glancing towards the windows. She attributes this to normal flight delay frustration and continues her duties with renewed vigor, as if her handling of the fraudulent passenger has elevated her status among the crew. The captain makes another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final passenger has arrived at the terminal and will be boarding momentarily. We expect to close the doors and begin pushback within the next 5 minutes." This announcement generates more activity among the cabin crew, with the senior flight attendant conducting a final check of first-class preparations with unusual attention to detail. Lila's phone rings again, and this time the businessman beside her sighs audibly. "You gonna answer that or what? Some of us are trying to relax." His irritation adds another layer to her humiliation, making her feel like a problem wherever she sits. She considers answering just to stop the harassment, but her pride in handling her own problems keeps her from reaching for the phone. Outside the aircraft, the final SUV has arrived, and its occupants are making their way through the terminal with an entourage that suggests serious corporate importance. Airport officials clear pathways and expedite security procedures with a level of deference reserved for only the most significant travelers. The precision of the operation suggests this is someone accustomed to this level of service. Karen performs a final check of the first-class cabin, ensuring every detail meets her exacting standards. She's particularly proud of how she's maintained the exclusivity of the section, believing her vigilance in removing Lila has upheld the integrity of premium service. The irony of this pride, given what's about to unfold, would be almost comical if it weren't so deeply rooted in harmful prejudice. The cabin door chimes, indicating an incoming boarding passenger, and the senior flight attendant positions herself at the front of first class with unusual formality. Something in the air has changed, though Karen remains focused on arranging amenity kits and ensuring seat configurations are perfect. She's about to experience the most profound professional reversal of her 15-year career, though she has no idea that her world is about to collapse entirely. The boarding door opens with unusual ceremony, and immediately the cabin atmosphere transforms. Captain Mitchell emerges from the cockpit, something that never happens during standard boarding procedures. The senior flight attendant, Janet Rodriguez, straightens her uniform and positions herself near the galley with military precision. Even passengers sense the shift, conversations dying as an expectant hush falls over first class. Lila Chen-Williams enters the aircraft with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect without demanding it. At 52, his presence fills the space, not through physical size, but through an indefinable quality that makes people instinctively defer. His charcoal gray suit is perfectly tailored, his silver-touched hair impeccably styled, and his expression carries the focused intensity of someone whose time is extraordinarily valuable. Behind him follows an entourage that speaks to serious corporate power. Janet Morrison, his executive assistant, carries a leather portfolio and moves with the efficiency of someone managing million-dollar decisions. David Park, head of operations, checks his tablet while maintaining pace. And Dr. Sarah Chen, the company's chief medical officer and Richard's sister, brings up the rear with the confident stride of someone equally comfortable in boardrooms and emergency rooms. Karen freezes in the middle of arranging first-class amenities, her brain struggling to process the sudden shift in cabin dynamics. She's witnessed VIP boardings before, but nothing approaching this level of corporate theatre. Captain Mitchell approaches the newcomer with genuine deference, his voice carrying respect reserved for airline ownership or regulatory officials. Mr. Chen-Williams, welcome aboard. We're honored to have you flying with us today. The captain's words hit Karen like physical blows. Chen-Williams. The name crashes through her consciousness as she realizes she's witnessing the arrival of Pacific Airways chairman and her chief executive officer, the man who signs her paychecks, who determines company policy, who could end her career with a single decision. Richard's response is measured, professional. Captain, thank you. I understand there was some issue with one of our passengers today. His question carries the weight of someone who already knows the answer but wants to hear it directly. Around the first-class cabin, passengers begin reaching for their phones, recognizing that they're witnessing something extraordinary. Lila's phone buzzes in economy, and this time she answers without checking the caller ID. Hello? Hardard. Her voice is strained from the stress of the past hour. Janet Morrison's voice comes through clearly. Ms. Chen-Williams, thank God. Your father is aboard the aircraft and needs to speak with you immediately about the incident earlier. The blood drains from Lila's face as the full implications hit her. Her father, the CEO of Pacific Airways, is on the plane. He knows about her humiliation. The privacy she's fought so hard to maintain, the independence she's worked 4 years to establish, crumbles in an instant. He's here? Now? She whispers, hoping the businessman beside her doesn't notice her distress. In first class, Richard addresses the assembled passengers with calm authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Richard Chen-Williams, Chairman and CEO of Pacific Airways. I apologize for the delay, but I needed to address a serious customer service issue that occurred during boarding today. His voice carries across the cabin with natural projection, ensuring every word reaches every passenger. Karen's world begins collapsing as the pieces click into place. The young woman she removed, the one she accused of fraud and treated with such contempt, shares the CEO's surname. Her hands begin trembling as she recalls every word she spoke, every assumption she made, every moment of casual cruelty she inflicted. Richard continues speaking, his tone remaining professional despite the personal nature of what he's addressing. Someone on my staff informed me that a passenger was removed from first class today under questionable circumstances. I'd like to understand exactly what happened, because the individual in question is my daughter, Lila Chen-Williams. The collective intake of breath from first-class passengers is audible. Several people immediately begin recording with their phones, recognizing they're witnessing a corporate crisis unfold in real time. Robert Sterling lowers his newspaper completely, his earlier uncomfortable feelings about Lila's treatment now transformed into sharp attention to how this situation develops. Sarah Whitman closes her laptop, her business instincts recognizing the gravity of what she's witnessing. This isn't just about customer service, it's about corporate reputation, potential discrimination lawsuits, and the kind of public relations disaster that can define a company for years. Her investment portfolio includes airline stocks, and she's calculating potential market impacts even as the drama unfolds. Captain Mitchell calls for Janet Rodriguez, the senior flight attendant, who approaches with visible nervousness. Janet, please explain to Mr. Chen-Williams what occurred during boarding today. The captain's tone makes clear this isn't a request, but a command, and Janet glances nervously toward Karen before beginning her account. Layla stands in economy, her legs unsteady as she processes the reality of her situation. The businessman beside her stares openly now, clearly having heard enough of her phone conversation to understand something significant is happening. The mother with the crying infant looks up from her child with curiosity, and other nearby passengers crane their necks to see the young woman who's suddenly become the center of extraordinary attention. "Dad," Lila says into the phone, her voice barely audible. "Please don't make this bigger than it needs to be. I can handle this myself." But even as she speaks the words, she knows her father's public involvement has transformed a personal humiliation into a corporate incident with far-reaching implications. Richard's expression hardens as Janet Rodriguez explains the events, her account growing more detailed and damning with each sentence. When she describes Karen's comments about people like you and accusations of fraudulent ticket use, Richard's jaw tightens visibly. The passengers listening begin exchanging glances that range from discomfort to outright shock at the behavior being described. Karen realizes her career is ending in real time. Every assumption she made, every prejudiced comment she voiced, every moment of casual discrimination is being recounted to the one person in the company with absolute authority to end her employment. She wants to interrupt, to explain, to somehow minimize the damage, but finds herself paralyzed by the magnitude of her mistake. The moment of complete revelation arrives when Richard addresses the cabin directly. "I want everyone here to understand that what happened to my daughter today represents everything my company stands against. Lila Chen-Williams was humiliated and removed from her rightfully purchased seat, based solely on assumptions about who she is and what she deserves. His voice carries the controlled anger of someone accustomed to solving problems but finding himself personally affected by corporate failure. The confrontation between Richard Chen-Williams and Karen Mitchell unfolds with the devastating precision of a corporate execution. Richard approaches Karen directly, his presence commanding absolute attention from every passenger and crew member within sight. His voice remains level, professional, but carries the weight of ultimate authority. "Ms. Mitchell, I believe you were the flight attendant who handled my daughter's seating situation today." It's not a question. Richard's tone makes clear he already knows every detail of what transpired. Karen's face has drained of all color, her 15 years of experience providing no preparation for facing the company's chief executive under these circumstances. "Mr. Chen-Williams, I was following standard protocol for suspicious ticket irregularities." Karen begins, her voice shaking despite her attempt to maintain professional composure. "The passenger's documentation raised red flags about potential fraud, and I acted to protect the integrity of our first-class service." Richard's expression doesn't change, but something in his eyes grows colder. "Red flags. Please elaborate on these red flags, Ms. Mitchell. What specifically about my daughter's valid ticket, legitimate identification, and paid reservation raised concerns about fraud?" His questions are surgical, designed to expose the lack of legitimate justification for Karen's actions. Behind Richard, Janet Morrison documents the conversation on her tablet, while David Park coordinates with ground crew to ensure passenger privacy during what's clearly becoming a formal incident investigation. Dr. Sarah Chen observes with the clinical detachment of someone accustomed to examining systemic failures, though her family connection to the victim adds personal investment to her professional assessment. Karen attempts to explain her reasoning, but each justification sounds more hollow than the last. The passenger appeared, out of place in first class. Her clothing, her luggage, her age, none of it fit the typical profile of our premium customers. When someone doesn't look like they belong in first class, we have to verify their credentials more thoroughly. "Doesn't look like they belong," Richard repeats, allowing the phrase to hang in the air. Around the cabin, passengers shift uncomfortably as the discriminatory nature of Karen's reasoning becomes undeniable. Robert Sterling finds himself remembering his own initial assumptions about Lila, feeling complicit in the injustice through his silence. The systematic dismantling of Karen's defense continues as Richard addresses each point methodically. "Ms. Mitchell, you've just admitted to treating a passenger differently based on her appearance, age, and your personal assessment of whether she belongs in first class. Are you familiar with our company's anti-discrimination policies?" Karen's attempts to backtrack only make her situation worse. "I never said anything about race. This was purely about suspicious ticket activity and maintaining security standards." But her protests ring hollow, given the documented timeline of events and witness accounts from other passengers who heard her comments. Janet Rodriguez, the senior flight attendant, provides additional context that further undermines Karen's position. "Sir, I should mention that Ms. Mitchell didn't consult with me before involving security, which is required protocol for suspected fraud cases. She also made comments to other passengers about maintaining standards and people trying to exceed their means." Richard turns to address the first-class passengers directly, transforming individual witnesses into a collective jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you witnessed what happened here today. A young woman was humiliated and removed from her purchased seat based on assumptions about who deserves respect and dignity. I want you to understand that this behavior represents a complete failure of everything Pacific Airways claims to value. The public nature of Karen's professional destruction serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates corporate accountability, provides witnesses to ensure accurate documentation, and creates a powerful deterrent for future discriminatory behavior. Several passengers nod in agreement with Richard's assessment, their initial entertainment at Lila's expense now transformed into recognition of injustice. David Park approaches with legal documentation already prepared. Sir, Ms. Mitchell's employment contract includes immediate termination clauses for discriminatory behavior and violations of customer service standards. HR has been notified and is prepared to process her dismissal effective immediately. The efficiency of the corporate response demonstrates this isn't Richard's first experience addressing discrimination within his company. Karen's final plea for clemency reveals the depth of her misunderstanding about what she's done wrong. Mr. Chen-Williams, I've been with Pacific Airways for 15 years. I've always maintained high standards and protected the company's interests. Surely my track record counts for something. Her inability to acknowledge the harmful nature of her actions makes redemption impossible. 15 years. Richard responds, of potential discrimination that went undetected because the victims didn't happen to be the CEO's daughter. That's not a defense, Ms. Mitchell. That's evidence of a systemic problem that ends today. His words carry implications beyond Karen's individual termination, suggesting company-wide policy changes and enhanced oversight. The immediate consequences for Karen extend beyond job loss. Richard's public handling of the situation ensures the incident will be documented, shared on social media, and potentially picked up by news outlets. Her professional reputation in the airline industry is effectively destroyed, with other carriers unlikely to hire someone fired for discrimination by a major airline's CEO. Security personnel arrive to escort Karen from the aircraft, their presence adding official weight to her termination. As she gathers her personal belongings under the watchful eyes of passengers who witnessed her earlier confidence, the complete reversal of power dynamics becomes starkly apparent. The woman who an hour ago wielded authority to humiliate others now faces her own public disgrace. Richard addresses the remaining crew with clear expectations about future behavior. Every Pacific Airways employee will receive mandatory bias training within 30 days. Customer service interactions will be monitored and documented. Most importantly, any passenger complaint alleging discrimination will be investigated at the executive level. His reforms ensure Lila's experience leads to systemic change rather than isolated punishment. The corporate response extends beyond immediate consequences to long-term accountability measures. Richard announces the establishment of a customer advocacy program, enhanced diversity training for all staff, and regular audits of passenger treatment across all service levels. Lila's humiliation becomes the catalyst for comprehensive reform that will protect future passengers from similar discrimination. 6 months after the incident that transformed Pacific Airways' approach to customer service, Lila Chen-Williams walks across the stage at Harvard Medical School's graduation ceremony. Her summa cum laude distinction represents years of dedicated study, but the confidence in her stride speaks to something deeper, the knowledge that she survived public humiliation and emerged stronger, more committed to fighting injustice wherever she encounters it. Richard Chen-Williams watches from the audience, his pride evident despite his typically reserved demeanor. The past 6 months have brought profound changes to both his company and his relationship with his daughter. Lila's insistence on handling her own challenges, even in the face of discrimination, has taught him valuable lessons about respecting her independence while using his position to create systemic change. Pacific Airways has become the airline industry's leader in diversity and inclusion, with its comprehensive anti-discrimination policies serving as a model for other carriers. The incident that began with Lila's humiliation has generated positive changes affecting millions of passengers. Customer satisfaction ratings have reached historic highs, particularly among previously marginalized communities who now feel welcomed rather than scrutinized. The ripple effects extend far beyond aviation. Business schools now teach case studies based on the incident, examining how corporate leaders should respond to discrimination within their organizations. Lila's story has become a powerful example of how individual dignity can catalyze institutional change when combined with principled leadership and public accountability. Karen Mitchell's aftermath provides a sobering counterpoint to the broader positive changes. After her termination, she struggled to find employment in the airline industry, eventually taking a retail position that forced her to confront her own biases. The experience, while devastating professionally, ultimately led to personal growth as she began working with diversity advocacy groups to prevent others from making similar mistakes. Lila has used her platform as the CEO's daughter to establish the Chen-Williams Foundation, which provides scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in medicine, aviation, and business. The foundation explicitly focuses on supporting individuals who might face discrimination based on their appearance, background, or assumptions about their capabilities. Her personal experience with injustice has become fuel for systemic change. The broader industry transformation continues to unfold. Other airlines, recognizing the competitive advantage of inclusive service and the reputational risks of discrimination, have implemented similar training programs and accountability measures. Lila's 15 minutes of humiliation have generated years of improved treatment for countless passengers who will never know her name but benefit from her courage. Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as Pacific Airways Chief Diversity Officer in addition to her medical role, regularly speaks at industry conferences about the business case for inclusive service. Her presentations often begin with the story of her niece's treatment, demonstrating how personal experiences can drive professional innovation when channeled through principled leadership. The incident has also strengthened the bond between Lila and her father, though in unexpected ways. Richard's public defense of his daughter demonstrated his values under pressure, while Lila's initial reluctance to use his influence showed her commitment to earning success on her own terms. Their relationship now balances mutual respect for independence with understanding of when family support becomes necessary. Lila's medical school classmates initially struggled with the attention her story generated, but eventually recognized how her experience enhanced their own understanding of patient advocacy. Her willingness to speak about discrimination in healthcare settings has influenced a generation of future doctors to examine their own biases and commit to treating all patients with equal dignity and respect. The corporate culture at Pacific Airways has fundamentally shifted from one of exclusivity to one of inclusion. Flight attendants now receive extensive training not just in safety procedures, but in unconscious bias recognition. The company's hiring practices prioritize diversity at all levels, ensuring that decision-makers reflect the communities they serve. Richard's handling of the crisis has become a template for corporate leadership in discrimination cases. His immediate response, public accountability, and systemic reforms demonstrate how executives can transform individual incidents into opportunities for meaningful change. Business leadership programs now study his approach as an example of values-driven crisis management. The legal implications of the incident have also created lasting change. While Lila chose not to pursue litigation, The documented nature of her treatment has been cited in subsequent discrimination cases, strengthening legal protections for passengers and employees. The precedent set by Pacific Airways' response has raised industry standards for addressing discriminatory behavior. Lila's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own behavior when witnessing injustice. How many times have you seen someone treated unfairly and chosen silence over action? How often have you made assumptions about others based on their appearance, age, or perceived social status? The passengers who watched Lila's humiliation had the power to speak up, but most chose the comfort of silence over the courage of intervention. Every act of discrimination depends on the complicity of bystanders who witness injustice and do nothing to stop it. Karen Mitchell's behavior was enabled by passengers who found entertainment in Lila's suffering rather than recognizing their moral obligation to intervene. Your voice, your willingness to challenge unfair treatment, can be the difference between someone suffering in silence and justice being served. The power to create change doesn't require a CEO, father, or corporate influence. It requires the courage to say, "This is wrong," when you witness discrimination. Lila's story demonstrates that dignity and principle can triumph over prejudice and power, but only when people of conscience choose action over apathy. The next time you see someone being treated unfairly, remember that your response defines not just their experience, but your character. Lila Chen-Williams transformed his daughter's humiliation into systemic change because he understood that true leadership means protecting the vulnerable, not just the privileged. You have the same opportunity every time you witness injustice, to be the voice that stops discrimination in its tracks, to be the person who refuses to let cruelty masquerade as policy. Lila's 15 minutes of humiliation generated months of positive change because people of principle decided to act. Her story continues to inspire others to speak up, to challenge unfair treatment, and to demand better from the institutions that serve us all. But inspiration without action is just entertainment. The real power lies in your willingness to be the change you want to see. Subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change through courage, principle, and refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Share Lila's story with others who need to understand that dignity is not negotiable and that every voice raised for justice echoes in eternity. Together we can ensure that no one else endures what Lila experienced, and that every act of discrimination meets swift and decisive resistance. Your moment to stand up for justice is coming. Will you be ready? Will you be the person who speaks when others stay silent, who acts when others hesitate, who transforms witnessing injustice into creating change? Lila's story is just the beginning. Your story of courage and principle is waiting to be written. Every act of courage creates a ripple of change. Every voice raised for justice echoes in eternity. Stand up, speak out, and watch the world transform, one brave moment at a time.